Welcome to Making Democracy Work, a monthly program brought to you by the League of Women Voters. Each month, we discuss topics of community interest. This month, we're going to be talking about the Red Hill fuel storage tanks. And we have with us Ernie Lau, who is the Chief Engineer for the Board of Water Supply. I am Pearl Johnson, and this is Kaui Lucas, my co-host. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me today.
And this is a topic of deep community concern because we are afraid for our drinking water, correct?
It's our drinking water resource. We ensure that our drinking water that we give to our customers is safe to drink. But the resource is at risk here.
So here we are. It's January of 2020. Let's just say that. And you've been working for years now to address this problem. Where are we kind of in the flow of things?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned January because it was on January 13th around noon of 2014 that I first became aware of the situation, the leak that was reported back in 2014, and now we've been here. This is our 6-year anniversary on this issue. Where we are today, we're still in discussions. There are still discussions going on under the administrative order and consent that was executed, signed by the EPA, Department of Health, the Navy, and the Defense Logistics Agency, and they're still going through the process of doing the studies. There hasn't been any really major decisions on how to upgrade the tanks yet, but supposedly that'll come up this year.
And it's pretty alarming that the Board of Water Supply only learned about it in 2014, whereas in the 1980s, there were people who were concerned about this.
Yeah, I think the Department of Health may have been aware of it prior to that. The facility was declassified, I think, only in the 90s, though. So prior to that, it was kind of a secret facility and not really available to the public for knowledge.
So
but the Department of Health was aware of problems with the fuel tanks well before 2014, but had not communicated with the Board of Water Supply.
It's, as far as I can tell, Pearl, because I came on the job as the manager in 2012, so it's hard for me to determine if prior to that the Board of Water Supply was notified of leaks. I don't think so. We looked at our records and we didn't seem to find records of that. And my associates at the BWS, some of them have been there for 35 years in the area of water quality. And Mr. Erwin Kawata, who's worked really hard on this Red Hill issue, he wasn't aware of the fuel tanks leaking prior to 2014.
okay, so let's show the overall map of. There's a picture with that cites where the fuel tanks are in the back. With the back, there we go.
Okay.
So we can kind of place that. We're looking back at Halava. The bare spot would be Halava Quarry to orient it.
This is a view from about the Foster Village area looking Mauka. So you can see clearly right in the middle of that bare spot is the Halava Quarry for Hawaiian cement. And you can see Mauna Loa Road in the foreground. To the right in the red circle, you can see Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility. That is between the valleys of Halava and Mauna Loa. And across the valley on the left is our Halava Shaft, which is about 5,000 feet to the west of the Red Hill facility.
Now, are the tanks under the green?
So you notice most of the hillsides along there have development, but the green area that's above the Kaiser Hospital area is where the fuel tanks are located underground.
Okay, so
And
if we
the
go to
green
the
is
next.
right above the fuel tanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's see the next one. Here we go. So you can kind of see there, Pearl, in that red area. That's the top of the ridge.
The red area defines the parcel or the boundary of the property that the Navy owns, where the fuel tanks are located. The little black dots, 2 rows of 10 black dots, represent the fuel tanks themselves. And you can see to the northwest is actually Halaba Shaft. This is a good map because it shows all the Board of Water Supply drinking water wells to the northwest and also to the south or east of the facility, fuel tank facility.
So there are a lot of wells in that general area.
We have quite a bit of wells. The Navy also has a water source called Navy Water Well here, also known as Red Hill Shaft, which is a Navy pumping drinking water source. It provides about 24% of Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM's drinking water supply.
Okay. And then we have another slide that shows there we go, what the tanks actually look like.
Yeah, this is a picture of the tanks. They were built, keep in mind, between 1940 and 1943, they were built underground in place. Each tank is 100 feet in diameter across and 250 feet tall. So you can actually fit Aloha Tower into each one of these tanks. And there are 2 rows of 10, so total 20 tanks. Total capacity, if they're all used, is about 250 million gallons of fuel.
Okay. So it's so easy to get lost in the details in this because it's such a huge subject. And speaking of lost, our background is the tunnels that feed the tanks here. And there are also 3 miles of tunnels, I believe, that are feeding the tanks.
There are two sets of tunnels. So I think we're looking in the lower access tunnel that runs connecting the bottoms of each tank. So there are 2 tunnels. One tunnel is called the upper tunnel, and that is at about the 200-foot height on each tank. And it's also where they have an access opening of about, I think it was about 8 feet in diameter into each tank. And then on the bottom of the tank is a pipe that comes out of the bottom through the concrete foundation that they've poured before they built the tanks. And it connects into the piping in the lower access tunnel. I think we're looking in the lower access tunnel. And they also have these cross tunnels, short cross tunnels that connect to the bottom of the tank. And to
Now,
that
those pipes that we see in the, above our heads, are those the fuel pipes?
No, those are not the fuel lines. There seems to be some, you can see maybe behind you, Pearl, it might look like some of the fuel lines. There are, I think, 3 fuel lines that run about 3 miles underground from this fuel facility, which is under that ridge at Red Hill, all the way down to the shores of Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. And there's about three lines. I forgot the size. One was pretty sizable pipes of 12 inches. It might have been 18 inches and 8 inches. And
so considerably larger than what we see over our heads.
A good point about those pipes. The 3 miles of pipeline in that lower access tunnel also could be subject to corrosion or damage. If there's an accident in the lower access tunnel, they actually have a small little electric-powered rail car that runs on tracks in the lower access tunnel because it's 3 miles, and they need to move men and equipment up and materials up and down that tunnel. One of the scenarios is potentially that little rail car derailing and damaging, breaking a pipe.
Mm-hmm. So the pipes are actually accessible, so that if it leaked, there would be a way to repair it because it goes through a tunnel. It isn't just embedded in the ground.
Yeah, it's mounted on angle brackets in that lower access tunnel, so it's exposed. The problem is they don't have a lot of valves on that pipe. And it's connected to these tall tanks, large capacity. So there could be quite a bit of fuel that could leak from a break in those pipes before they actually got it isolated and shut off.
That's one of the attractions of this, is that
Gravity
you can gravity feed Pearl Harbor and Hickam from these tanks. It don't
Right,
need a
and
pump.
that's one of the things that the Navy cited as an important component is they pump it up the hill to these tanks up at under Red Hill. They flow it by gravity without pumping back down to Pearl Harbor to fill up the ships.
But one of the big drawbacks is if there's a leak in the pipe, gravity is going to feed that leak. Right?
The full capacity of the tanks until they can close a valve
Yes.
to try to shut it off. So.
So here we sit, very concerned
too many
about
details.
our aquifer here. And one of the things we know as the years have gone on, and we watch what's happened around the U.S., is that you can have large municipalities' water source compromised seriously, like in Flint, Michigan, for instance, and years can actually go by and nothing happens. So here we are. I think we talked about this 3 or 4 years ago, and we're still here.
Yeah, it's amazing. Some things never change, unfortunately.
Let's hope this changes. But one of the things that we can't just say, oh well, it's the Navy. They're going to take care of us if something happens. And I think that we've learned from what's happened in Puerto Rico. The Navy likes to say that this fuel would be of use to us in an emergency, and that's partially true and not quite true.
Yeah, you're right. I'd like to see the formal agreement that makes it easily accessible.
But the real thing is that this facility is on top of an aquifer.
That's one thing I failed to say earlier is 100% of this huge facility for underground fuel storage that was built during World War II sits right over our drinking water aquifer, a very high quality aquifer. And we estimate right now, probably about 180 million plus gallons of fuel stored right now over this aquifer. And it's 70 plus years old.
So if there's, 170 million gallons, give or take, right? We don't know how long that would take. So to empty, but is it possible to clean up that kind of a spill?
That's a question that we don't know the answer to. We think it's going to be very difficult. Because think of the aquifer, the underground aquifer. It's not a lake of water underground. It's actually water that is in the cracks and crevices and pukas of the porous lava rock, and the spaces between different lava flows that have layered up over time. That's where the fresh water is located. So if the fuel gets into those little cracks and crevices, like the cracks and the pukas in a sponge, think of the aquifer like a sponge. If that was soaked now with fuel, the sponge is pliable. You could squeeze the sponge to squeeze the fuel water out, or if it was fuel, you could squeeze it out, but not with the lava rock. So it's going to depend on the natural degradation of that fuel over time when bacteria starts to eat it slowly, or the flushing action of groundwater flowing through that area. We don't know how long it's going to take, and that's our concern, is that this is an opportunity to actually prevent large-scale contamination of this precious drinking water resource, rather than dealing with it after it's contaminated.
Now, the Board of Water Supply's preferred alternative is to double wall the tanks. And that means that there would be a tank within a tank with space to look at both sides of the wall of the steel, so that you could detect any corrosion, any weakness from both sides of the steel wall.
Especially on the inner tank. The inner tank will be the most critical liner that keeps the fuel, container that keeps the fuel from getting into the environment. But once it passes that, it'll be captured by a secondary wall that'll capture it. And also, the space should be wide enough so workers and equipment can go in there and do repairs and maintenance on both sides of that inner tank.
So that's your preferred?
That's our preferred option if they insist on staying at their location.
Okay.
The best option that would eliminate the risks in the future of further contamination of our drinking water aquifer is actually to relocate the whole fuel storage facility to a location that's not over the drinking water aquifer.
Okay, and you've explained to us, this is a visual that explains they're different, those are the different types of tank within a tank, but you're saying that the Board of Water Supply is actually prefers the tanks being located, is that right?
In an ideal situation.
Okay.
But if the Navy insists that they have to have it there,
I
then they
see.
need to do secondary containment as we see it, which is like a tank within a tank. These are 6 options that was studied by the Navy. They recently submitted their recommendation of the 6 options, going from maybe the top left, our left, I guess, or be the viewer's left. Refurbished lower dome and coating. That's basically clean, inspect, and patch. Then on the bottom right is tank within a tank. That's more along the lines of what we would prefer if they had to stay there.
Okay, and then, so the one that they've chosen is the upper right, is the upper left, sorry?
Yes, the refurbished / lower dome coating. It's basically a little bit more of an enhancement of what they currently are doing as a maintenance and repair approach for keeping those tanks in operation.
All right, so I think that we need to inform our audience as to what is going on right now, that there is corrosion which cannot be detected using the methods that they already have, correct?
That's correct. And actually, Pearl, I brought this is a mock-up or a model of steel plate that was removed from tank number 14. It's not the actual steel plate, but it's kind of a mock-up. So this is what they could see on the inside. So remember that the tanks are the thing that the steel liner that holds the fuel in each tank is 1/4 inches thick. And it's steel plate that was welded together in the Second World War. So they can only, and then it's supported by like 3 or 4 feet of reinforced concrete. So they only can see what's on the inside of that steel plate on one side, which when they took out that steel plate, this is one of the pieces that it looked like this. So you see it looks pretty good. There's some paint markings on here. And then they take an approach of using different instruments to scan through the metal to determine how deep the rust has penetrated through the metal. And the metal's only 1/4 inch thick. So when we looked at the other side of that steel plate, this is what it looked like. Which you can see what looks like corrosion here.
Yes.
So I was very glad to actually see this because for a number of years, the owner of the facility denied that there was any corrosion going on because they felt that the concrete was up against the steel. Concrete against the steel, if there's no space or gap where water or air can get in, will help protect the steel from corrosion. It'll help to pacify that corrosion. But when that separates away and there's rainwater percolating down on that ridge because it rains kind of heavily sometimes, it soaks down and gets between the steel and the concrete over time can move away or develop spaces, and it can cause opportunity for rust. So what we have is this 1/4 inch steel plate installed 70 plus years ago that is rusting from the outside going toward the inside.
Now, many of our viewers may be familiar with this in their own building. If they live in a concrete and steel building, they have had repairs due to what is called spalling. And that is exactly what is happening.
The rebar in the reinforced concrete could be
Yes.
because water's getting in there and corroding and expanding and causing the concrete to crack, thus allowing maybe more water to get in there and the concrete to separate from the steel.
Right. So that many of our viewers are experiencing this personally in their own building. It's happening. And We don't want it happening over the aquifer with steel, with fuel leaking down into our aquifer.
That's what we've been working hard at the Board of Water Supply for the past 6 years. We take our responsibilities very seriously. This aquifer, this freshwater resource, according to our Hawaii State Constitution, is a public trust resource to be preserved and protected and used for the people of Hawaii.
All right. So whoever prepared this response to the Navy addressed to Environmental Protection Agency and to the Navy did a very good job. And so they're saying, in this letter, it says, destructive testing demonstrated that 4 of the 10 coupons, this would be a coupon, removed from tank 14 were thinned by corrosion to the point that repair is required. But the Navy's, prior to coupon removal, only identified 2 of these locations as needing repair.
So about a 50-50 accuracy percentage, 1 and 2. So when we analyzed their test data and came to that conclusion, we feel that relying upon that approach going forward, even for the next 10, 20 years, it's not a reliable method of patching the steel plate before it leaks. So we think more leaks will develop over time as the corrosion advances. And their ability to accurately locate those locations, the level of confidence.
50%.
The level of confidence is low,
Right.
not at an acceptable level.
Yes, yes, And so the first preferred alternative is to really relocate the tanks altogether, and the location would be onto the Cap Rock area, which is not over the aquifers.
What we have is the Cap Rock area, which is located along the coastal area, is basically marine sediments and deposits that developed, built up over years, and also there's been changes in sea level over time. So that is an area of low quality groundwater or low permeability. And it's not areas where we have drinking water aquifers located that we depend on. So we feel that there's enough land on Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, also maybe land in other industrial areas on Oahu, that tanks can be built at maybe multiple locations above ground that will last a lot longer, be easier to repair, and most importantly, protect our precious freshwater groundwater resource from further contamination.
And the Navy's objection is that they would have to be pumped, whereas from these Red Hill tanks, it's gravity fed. Big deal. Pumping instead of gravity feed.
They have their own reasons, and I don't always agree with them.
Very diplomatic.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to, I had the fortunate experience of going in and walking into the fuel tanks a few months ago, and on the public tour, and it's I highly recommend it. Actually, it's an awesome facility, and to see this memorial to the engineers and the workers who built the tanks so long ago, it's phenomenal. I mean, there's nothing else like it. And as much pride as we can have in this facility, it was also clear that because the use of it is really to supply war machines, should they be needed, that it's not particularly the appropriate place to have these fuel storage tanks. And what you're suggesting seems to make a lot of sense. But I was wondering, in that scenario you pointed out of the above ground storage tanks, has there been a price comparison?
Unfortunately, we don't have a price, and that wasn't something that was actually in the study for alternative sites. That didn't look at pricing above ground storage tanks. So they did the Navy did do an alternative site study to store the fuel in different locations, and that was, I think, at least 2 years ago now. They developed certain criteria, and one of the criteria was it had to be underground. So they kind of eliminated that option. But in the recent years, we found other locations where naval fuel storage facilities were located on the mainland, like Manchester, Washington, where they had a similar situation. They had a World War II vintage underground storage tanks, field constructed. They decided, after doing the economic analysis, that it was much cheaper to build above ground storage tanks. And they implemented that action there in Manchester, Washington, Kitsap. There was also Point Loma in San Diego.
What happened there?
They also had an issue of leaks, and they decided to rebuild to above ground storage tanks.
Well, we had the opportunity to ask the Navy.
What did they say?
So they also said, well, it's got to be like this one is, underground and have all of this stuff. And I said, well, how many of your other fuel storage facilities are underground? And I think they only have 2 others that are underground. One is in Asia. But most of their storage facilities are not underground. So it seems artificial to make that a prerequisite.
Even here in Pearl Harbor, they have above ground storage tanks there. Right along Cam Highway where the rail is running, you can see above ground fuel storage tanks.
Well,
Good
we are
question.
out of time, and we haven't really plumbed the depths of this. But thank you so much, Ernest Lau.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Pearl. And
Kaui Lucas, my co-host. I'm Pearl Johnson. Thank you for watching.